Hello, my name's Rob Edwards. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today we're talking playing role-playing games at conventions. More broadly, I guess I'm talking about playing in living campaigns. Living campaigns, I think I'm showing my role-playing age there because I'm not sure people use this term anymore. But what it essentially means is it's a campaign where, through a system of log sheets and certificates, you can take a character from one game at a convention to another game at another convention and keep playing it. Now, games at conventions could be living campaigns or they could be one-off games. My first convention experience was at AmberCon, which was a convention for the Amber Diceless role-playing game, and that was pretty much universally one-shot games, one and done. Amber is a fun system which really supports some really wild and out there games, and most of them were one-shots, and a lot of them were even player versus player based. So we'd have a thing in Amber called a throne war, where the games master would set up a situation where, the king was dying and he hadn't announced an heir, and the idea was which player's character could become king thereafter. And this often led to backroom deals, backstabbing, wars, and all the rest of it, and was a lot of fun. I played in one throne war where I managed to kill off another player's character before the game had actually technically started, resulting in the games master having to frantically come up with a justification of why he could play a ghost of his character for the rest of the game. But I'm not proud of that. I'm a little bit proud of that. I'm not proud of that, but those are one-off games, and that's what Amber was about. I love going to AmberCon. But the problem I always had with one-off games, and AmberCon particularly, but one-off games generally, is that it always takes me a while to really get to know a character that I'm role-playing, and to really find their voice and what they like and what they dislike and all that side of things. So I found a lot of one-shot games at conventions. I ended up playing the game, not playing the character. I was usually trying to solve the puzzle of the game. And that's a fun way to play. I had a lot of fun doing those. But I also like role-playing. I like playing my character. So for me, living campaigns were what really got me into playing at conventions, because it gave me a chance to really get to know and attach to my character. The other great thing about living campaigns is for people like me who end up in our home games spending a lot of time being the games master. Because there were people going there specifically to Games Master, it meant that I could actually get a chance to play in some of the game systems that I loved. The very first game system I got into at a convention as a living game was the Star Wars role-playing game. By then was from Wizards of the Coast, based around a sort of D&D model, essentially, the D20 system. And I got to play in Living Force at a convention at Gen Con, I think, in the UK. And I really loved it. It was brilliant. I wasn't going to get a chance to play in a game of Star Wars anywhere else, really, because nobody else I knew was wanting to run a game of Star Wars. Many people wanted to play in it, but nobody really wanted to run it. So I got a chance to get in there and play a game at a convention. Of course, the problem is that a lot of games conventions also need games masters, so it wasn't very long before I found myself volunteering to run some games at conventions as well. So when it came to Living Force, which was the name of the Star Wars living campaign back then, I did get involved. I got to play I still got to play in games, which was nice, but I also did find myself volunteering to GM a lot of games. In fact, eventually, I got to volunteer to write some games for Living Force. I've talked, I think, on my channel before about my Wikipedia entry, which is because I did write 5 or 6, actually 7, I think in the end, role-playing games in the Living Force campaign, which were official from Wizards of the Coast and were officially stamped by someone at Lucasfilm. So it is my greatest geek pride that someone at Lucasfilm, and nobody important, I'm no delusions here, nobody important, but somebody at Lucasfilm has at least looked at a page I've written in the Star Wars universe and nodded at it to say that'll go out. All legend now, of course, it was back in the time of the prequels, So it's a long time ago now. But I've made my contribution to Star Wars, which is quite exciting. Now, it was also the first chance I got to see the upsides and downsides of playing in a living campaign. One of the downsides came from you are somewhat at the mercy of the games master you have at the table. And if you go to a game at home or at a local club, you tend to build up a rapport with the games master and know what they like and know what you like. And, it becomes something of a group experience. One of my earliest experiences of Living Force was a games master who had a different idea of what a dark side action was and how often he should be handing out dark side points. Now, again, we don't want to get too deep into the weeds of the mechanics of the Star Wars role-playing game from like 3 or 4 iterations ago now. But getting rid of a dark side point was actually quite hard work, particularly in a living campaign. Once you'd acquired one, there was something of a stain on your character. I acquired my dark side point by joining in a joke around the table about wanting to shoot a Gungan who turned up in the game. It was all out of character. It was all fun because everybody hated Jar Jar Binks. But the games master decided that this joking about shooting a character in cold blood was worthy of a dark side point, and he awarded, I think, 3 or 4 dark side points around the table for taking part in this joke. And that, for me, really kind of soured me a little bit on the experience early on. But I played through. I eventually atoned for my dark side point, and never experienced a James Master call like that again. So that was okay. What I liked about Living Force, what I particularly enjoyed about Living Force was it was actually quite a small community played Living Force in the UK. And it meant that we would see lots of familiar faces from convention to convention, and we could start building in our own in-jokes, our own sort of through lines in the games of the campaign, and it felt a bit like playing a home game at a convention. So we had an ongoing running gag about a troupe of Rhodian mime artists, for example, or the fact that Celestan children were always the one who were getting into trouble, and just little things like little flourishes we'd put in the game to make them our own, and it was really nice. One of the things about living games, as I said earlier, they were all driven by log sheets and certificates, and you could get equipment and spaceships in Living Force and stuff like that would continue through, and you would need a certificate to prove that you'd earned it fairly through a game, and you ended up having folders full of certificates of all the things that you had done and acquired and reputation that you'd earned and stuff like that. And it was a lot of faff at the end of a game to actually do all of that paperwork. But there was something quite fun looking back through my folder of certificates for my character. Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember getting that in that situation. So it was rather nice. My character in Living Force, just while we're talking about things like this, was a character known as Cal Drevik. He started off as a pilot. I forget the character class. Outlander, possibly? Something like that. Explorer? I can't remember what the classes were. But he started off that, and I went Jedi Guardian. So I was Force sensitive from the start. Finally got myself a Jedi class, got my hands on a lightsaber, and had a lot of fun. Romping through various modules, piloting and lightsabering to my heart's content. The next living campaign I got involved in was Living Arcanis. At the time, there were all sorts of D&D based living campaigns. There was Living Forgotten Realms, Living Greyhawk. All of these were kind of ongoing and popular. But I got into Living Arcanis mostly because the other games were too popular. One of the downsides about living campaigns at a convention is there are always more games masters than there are players, and it was always a bit of a scrum getting into the particular game you wanted. Back then, Living Forgotten Realms and Living Greyhawk were the popular ones. Living Arcanis, less so. So I got into Arcanis games more regularly, so that's kind of the one I chose to be a part of. Arcanis was rich in lore. It had its own prestige class. It was all based on D&3 3.5. So when I say prestige classes and feats, they were what 3.5 characters were kind of all about, really, back in the day. And loot and whatever. And it was a campaign which hopped all over the world of Arcanis, and each region had its own flavour to it. So there was one region which was very kind of ancient Rome, gladiator pits and that kind of thing, and there was another region which was more sort of traditional medieval fantasy. There was an Egyptian type zone as well, and it was really nice. You got lots of different flavours to your character experience, because you would be playing in one game and be shooting black powder pistols at people, and another game you'd be fighting scarabs in a tomb, and it was just a lot of fun. One of the things that they did, and I think I've seen them in other living campaigns as well, was the battle interactives. I only ever got to play in one of them, unfortunately. But that was where lots of players would come together and play the same module at the same time as each other. And they would be sort of turning points in the campaign. So the sort of average result from all these different games would inform the direction of the rest of the campaign. I really enjoyed the one battle interactive I got to play in. My character in Living Arcanis, I'm glad you asked, was a character called Luther. He was a swashbuckling pirate type. He fought with 2 rapiers, and by the end of the campaign, what with all the different feats and prestige classes and all the other stuff, I had a ridiculous number of attacks around, critically hitting on a stupidly small number, and any combat round I fought with Luther involved buckets and buckets of dice. I have to say, one of the things I'm glad that 5e has done is to reduce that a little bit. But still, it was a lot of fun at the time. I did need a spreadsheet, though, to keep track of what my attack bonuses and damage bonuses were in different situations, depending on whether I used this feat, this ability, or that ability. The next living campaign I got involved in was Living Spycraft. Now, espionage games are not really my genre, but a lot of my friends who played Force and Arcanis were into that side of things. And so, I went along as a chance to play. And I swore I was never going to games master Living Spycraft, because I wasn't enough into that as a campaign world. And I was just going to play. I would rather have opted just to play Living Force. But if I'm going to play in a game which wasn't really my thing, I would rather play in it than games master it. And so I did. That's what I did. I played a character called Kate, or codename Lady, I think. Not very original, but there we go. She was a con artist. A Face, I think, was the character class that she got to play. And I really enjoyed playing her. And then Living Spycraft died. And when Living Spycraft died, there were still a lot of people, particularly in the UK, who were still wanting to play it. It was actually a really popular game at some of the conventions I used to go to. And so several of my friends decided they wanted to do their own offshoot Living campaign, which was going to be based around Spycraft, specifically UK spies, and we called it For Queen and Country, and we started up our own Living campaign using Spycraft rules, set in our own world with our own NPCs, our own through line for the adventures, and For Queen and Country was a lot of fun. Of course, at that point I started having to write modules for it and games master for it, and it was all a bit kind of not what I'd originally intended Spycraft experience to be for me, but there we go. That is what you get into when you get into a Living campaign. Sooner or later you're probably going to end up games mastering something. The final game to mention is the one I guess most people would think of now, I suppose, when they think of ongoing campaigns played at conventions, and that is the Pathfinder campaign. It's recently upgraded to Pathfinder Edition 2. I've never played in the second edition Pathfinder version. I've only ever played Pathfinder in the first edition. I had a character called Jarvin Hopfield, who was a farmer who had inherited a magical staff from his sorcerer uncle, and he was basically a sorcerer courtesy of this staff. And this was me trying to break away from trying to solve the adventures that I went to at conventions, and I was determined that I was going to role play out Jarvin. And I spent a lot of time having a lot of fun role-playing Jarvin in spite of what was going on in the campaign. I hope I didn't derail adventures by playing Jarvin the way I did. That was never my intent, but I wanted to be able to really kind of associate with that character going forwards. Pathfinder for me, I enjoyed it. It was a bit more combat heavy than some of the other living campaigns, somewhat more dungeon crawly than some of the other living campaigns I played in. But I enjoyed it. I did. I enjoyed it. Didn't get to play very much, and as such, I never really leveled very high in Pathfinder, but I had fun with it. I did. At the most recent convention I went to before the pandemic, which was Ropecon in Helsinki, it was 2 or 3 years ago now. 3 or 4 years ago now. Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago now. I wanted to play some more Pathfinder, but I couldn't get in. Again, what I was talking about earlier, there's always more players than there are available GMs to run games. So I was a bit stuck for a game. But Pathfinder had just sort of launched a spin-off version called Starfinder, which I've played 2 sessions of at Ropecon, and I loved. It felt a bit like getting back into Living Force again for me, because it was more of a science fiction world with a bit of fancy elements in it. Still lots of magic in there, but it was spaceships and jump engines and all that kind of good stuff, which I really, really liked. And so I got to play 2 modules of Starfinder at that convention, and I've never gotten back to a convention again to play any more Starfinder. I have, however, run some more Starfinder for my Finnish family and friends. I'm afraid they're not quite as into it as I am, so I am stuck with a character that I think I've game mastered enough now that I think I'm level 3 in Starfinder, but I've never actually played my character since he was level 1, which is a bit of a weirdness. But anyway, there we go. That's everything I wanted to talk about the wonderful world of playing games at conventions, and specifically the wonderful world of living games. I guess now for straight vanilla D&D, I think, is that what Adventurers League is for? I don't really know, if I'm honest. But what's your favourite? Have you been in living campaigns? What's been your convention experience? If you have stories or things to share, don't let me down. Put them in the comments. I'm looking forward to reading them. Thank you very much for watching today. That's it from me. I am working towards having a new schedule for videos on the channel, trying to build a little bit more consistency about what I do. And I'm aiming to get a role-playing or gaming video out every second week of the month. So if you enjoyed this and you want to know more about gaming from me, then look for it in the second week of June. But that's it from me for today. Next week, I'm going to do a video, hopefully, as long as I don't fall down on this like I sometimes do, hopefully I'm going to do a video about some of my writing influences. So that is what I'm going to be doing a video about next week. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Cheers.